Morning sunlight streamed through the high windows of the bus terminal, creating golden stripes on the polished concrete floor. It was a typical Tuesday, the kind that slips unnoticed on the calendar of urban life, yet sometimes holds moments capable of changing everything. Amidst the hustle and bustle of hurried passengers, rolling luggage, and echoing announcements over the PA system, a quiet figure stood precisely because she didn't. Mary Johnson, 72 years old, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wore a brown coat that had weathered many winters. Her hands, etched with decades of domestic work and caring for other people's children, gently held a worn cloth bag. Inside were a few essential belongings: a yellow document, a faded family photo, a small vial of heart medication, and a purse with a few coins. She had come from a nearby town for a doctor's appointment she couldn't afford and was now waiting for the bus home. What made Mary special wasn't just the 50 years she dedicated to caring for other families, raising children who weren't her own, cleaning houses that would never be hers, preparing meals that rarely left enough for herself. What made her unique was the way she carried this history, without bitterness, without self-pity, with a serene dignity that emanated from her upright posture and the soft glow in her brown eyes. She approached the information counter, where a young employee, his hair neatly cropped and his uniform impeccable, typed something on the computer without looking up. Mary approached with slow but steady steps, waited a few seconds, and in a gentle voice inquired about the next bus to her town. The young man, whose name tag read Diego, quickly looked up, assessed her from head to toe, and replied in a tone that blended haste and disdain. "The bus to Oakhaven leaves at 2 p.m. Next." Mary stood there for a moment, trying to process the information. It was only 10 a.m., and she didn't have money for lunch or coffee. She tried to explain her situation, mentioning that she was returning from an unfulfilled medical appointment, but Diego had already returned his attention to the computer screen, completely ignoring her presence. "Excuse me, young man, but could I ask if—" "I said, ma'am, bus at 2. You'll have to wait. Next." The harshness of the reply made Mary take a step back. She wasn't used to being treated with contempt, especially not by someone who could be her grandson. Throughout her life, she had been invisible in a different way, invisible as a domestic worker, as a woman who cared for others behind the scenes, but always treated with a minimum of courtesy. This was different. It was a cruel invisibility, reducing her to a nuisance, something that needed to be quickly removed from sight. She moved away from the counter, carrying more than her cloth bag. She now carried the weight of humiliation, of an age that society sees disposable, of a social status that made her irrelevant in the eyes of someone who held the power to inform her about a simple bus schedule. She found a metal bench near the window and pulled her brown coat around her as if it were a protective shield. The terminal continued its frantic routine. Executives spoke loudly on their cell phones, college students shared earbuds, families organized their luggage for weekend trips. Everyone seemed to have a rush, a destination, a purpose. Mary, motionless on her bench, began to feel like a stone in the middle of a river, with the current of life flowing around her without touching her. It was then that other people began to notice her presence, not because of what she was doing, but because of what she wasn't doing. While everyone around her moved with urgency, Mary remained serene, her hands clasped over her bag, looking out the window as if contemplating not only the external landscape, but a lifetime of memories. A middle-aged woman, with blonde hair and carrying a suitcase, passed Mary 3 times in 15 minutes. The first time she didn't notice. The second time she glanced sideways. The third time she slowed her pace and felt something tighten in her chest. There was something about that elderly woman that reminded her of her own grandmother, who had died alone in a public hospital while she was too busy with work meetings to visit her. A young couple, he with a guitar on his back and she with a sketchbook, also began to observe Mary. They had noticed the scene at the information counter and were whispering to each other about the rude way she had been treated. They wanted to do something, but they didn't know exactly what. The tall, robust black security guard also noticed the situation. He had worked there for 15 years and knew the routine of the place well. He knew how to recognize when someone was lost, when someone needed help, when someone was being mistreated. His name was Robert, and he had a personal rule: never interfere in the affairs of other employees, but always help when needed. For almost an hour, Mary remained seated, observing the movement. Everyone would approach the information counter, be quickly served, and go on their way. She began to feel thirsty, but didn't want to spend her few coins on water. She began to feel hungry, but the same financial calculation prevented her from buying anything. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, slipped her hand from her mother's and ran towards Mary. The girl had noticed Mary sitting alone and, with the innocent curiosity of her age, wanted to know why. She stopped in front of Mary and, with a smile that hadn't yet learned to be calculating, asked, "Ma'am, are you waiting for someone?" Mary smiled for the first time that morning. It was a smile that completely transformed her face, revealing a youthfulness that years and hardship hadn't entirely erased. "I'm waiting for the bus, sweetie. You're very polite. My grandma used to wait buses too. She always carried cookies in her bag. Did you bring any cookies?" The child's innocent question touched something deep within Mary. She remembered when she used to bring homemade cookies to the children she cared for, how they would run to her when she arrived in the morning, how they felt loved and protected in her arms. She remembered when her own granddaughter, now a grown woman and distant, used to ask similar questions. "I didn't bring any today, sweetheart, but next time—" "Clara, come here right now. Leave the lady alone." The child's mother, a hurried woman with an embarrassed expression on her face, pulled the girl away by the arm. As she passed Mary, she mumbled an almost inaudible "sorry" and hurried toward the boarding platform. The child waved to Mary over her shoulder, and that simple gesture made her feel seen, acknowledged as a human being, perhaps for the first time that morning. "I raised 6 children who weren't mine. I cared for dozens of children throughout my life. I cleaned houses, cooked, ironed clothes, did everything necessary to support my family. I never asked for anything but respect, and respect costs nothing, son." Roberto, the security guard, had discreetly approached. He sensed that something important was happening there. Other passengers also began to stop, forming a small semicircle around the counter. The middle-aged woman who had passed Mary several times, the young couple with the guitar, some students returning from the university, a taxi driver waiting for clients. "What did I do to deserve being treated like I'm a nuisance?" Mary continued, her voice remaining calm despite the growing emotion. "Is it because I'm old? Because I'm poor? Because I don't wear expensive clothes or talk loudly on my cell phone?" Diego began to feel uncomfortable with the attention the situation was attracting. He tried to minimize. "Look, ma'am, I didn't mean to be rude. There are a lot of people here, a lot of movement." There was a lot of movement when the lady in the fur coat came to ask about the executive bus. But for her, you had time, you smiled, you were kind. Why was it different with me? The silence that followed was almost palpable. The people around began to understand that they weren't just witnessing a complaint about bad service, but witnessing a lesson about human dignity and respect. The revelation that Mary had a granddaughter who cared for her, that someone was waiting for her, completely changed the atmosphere. She wasn't just a lonely old woman waiting for a bus. She was a grandmother, a loved one, someone missed in another person's life. "My granddaughter, Anna, is really worried," Mary confirmed, and for the first time her voice trembled slightly. "She doesn't know the appointment didn't work out, that I didn't have the money to pay. She'll be worried if I don't get there on time." The middle-aged woman could no longer contain herself. She approached Mary and, with a voice choked with emotion, said, "Mary,
I'm a doctor. I work at the public hospital in Oakhaven. If you'd like, I can take a look at you right now. No charge, of course. The offer took Mary by surprise. She looked at the woman, blonde hair, expensive clothes, travel bag, and saw beyond the appearance. She saw a person who, like her, knew the pain of seeing missed opportunities, of realizing that time doesn't turn back, of understanding that simple gestures can transform lives. No need, doctor. Thank you, but I insist. My grandmother died waiting for an appointment that never came. Let me do for you what I wish someone had done for her. At this moment, something magical began to happen. The young couple approached and offered water and a sandwich they had bought. The taxi driver said he could take Mary home for free. An elderly woman selling sweets at the terminal appeared with a bag of candy and said it was for the trip. University students offered their cell phones so Mary could call her granddaughter. And this reminds me of something very important. We all have the power to transform someone's day, to make a difference in a person's life. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe that small gestures can change the world, please subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of these stories that celebrate the best of humanity. Your presence here also makes a difference. Diego, the employee who had started the whole situation, watched everything in silence. He was seeing something he had never witnessed before. The transformation of a bus terminal into a space of community, of mutual care, of recognition of human dignity. He approached Mary and, with a voice that no longer had the harshness of the morning, said, "Mary, I apologize, sincerely. There's no excuse for the way I treated you. My grandmother always said that you know a person's character by how they treat those who can't do anything for them. I failed miserably at that today." Mary looked at Diego, and in her eyes, there was no anger or resentment. There was understanding, compassion, the kind of wisdom that only comes from a lifetime of learning to forgive. Son, we all make mistakes. The important thing is to acknowledge the mistake and try to do differently next time. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Use it to be better. Roberto, who had been observing everything, realized that this moment needed to be honored in a special way. He went to the terminal sound system and, with the authority of someone who had worked there for 15 years, made an announcement. "Passengers and employees, attention please. I would like to introduce you all to Mary Johnson, a woman who dedicated 50 years of her life to caring for others. She raised children, cleaned houses, cooked, did everything necessary to support her family. Today, she gave us a lesson about dignity, about respect, about how to treat each other." The applause that followed was not just polite or perfunctory. It was sincere, warm, charged with emotion. Mary, who had spent decades being invisible, suddenly found herself in the spotlight, not as an object of pity, but as a symbol of strength, dignity, and perseverance. Tears rolled down her face, but they were tears of joy, of recognition, of a life finally seen and valued. She waved to the people around her, and each wave seemed to say, "Thank you for seeing me, for recognizing me as a human being." Dr. Carmen, the blonde-haired doctor, insisted on examining Mary right there, improvising an office in a reserved room at the terminal. She discovered that Mary had a cardiac arrhythmia that required specific medication, but was perfectly treatable. More importantly, she gave Mary the address of a free clinic where she could continue her treatment. "Mary, you'll be fine, but you need to take care of yourself. You need to value your health. Your granddaughter needs you, and we also need people like you in the world." When Mary's bus finally arrived, a small crowd gathered to say goodbye to her. Diego, the employee who had been rude in the morning, appeared with a bag of homemade cookies he had bought at the terminal snack bar. "For the trip, Mary, and so you'll remember that not everyone is as rude as I was this morning." Mary laughed, a crystalline laugh that seemed 40 years younger. "Son, I'll remember how you changed, how you grew. That's much more important." Roberto walked her to the bus, carrying her cloth bag with the same delicacy with which one carries something precious. Before she got on, he said, "Mary, you changed this place today."
You changed us. We'll never forget. Mary boarded the bus and chose a window seat. As the vehicle started moving, she waved to the people left on the platform. They waved back, and that simple exchange of gestures sealed something important. The promise that this day wouldn't be forgotten, that the lesson learned here would be carried forward. During the ride home, Mary reflected on everything that had happened. She had arrived at the terminal feeling invisible, disposable, diminished. She was returning feeling seen, valued, remembered. Not because of some magical transformation in her financial or social situation, but because of something far more powerful, the recognition of her dignity as a human being. When she got home, her granddaughter Anna was waiting for her, worried about the delay. Mary recounted everything that had happened, from the doctor's appointment she couldn't afford to the moment she was applauded by dozens of people at the terminal. "Grandma, I don't understand how people can be so bad and so good at the same time." Mary smiled, a smile that now seemed even brighter. "My dear, people aren't bad or good. They're people. They have better days and worse days, moments of selfishness and moments of generosity. The important thing is always to give them the chance to be better." That night, Mary slept better than she had in months. Not because her financial situation had changed, not because her health problems had disappeared, but because she had rediscovered something that life's difficulties had obscured: her own worth, her own importance in the world. Things changed at the bus terminal, too. Diego started treating all passengers with the same courtesy, regardless of their appearance or social status. Robert continued doing his security work, but now with special attention to people who seemed to need help. Dr. Carmen returned to the terminal several times, always willing to help anyone who needed medical attention. More importantly, Mary's story spread. People who were present that day told family and friends. The story was shared on social media, recounted in family gatherings, remembered in moments of reflection. It became a symbol that human dignity doesn't depend on wealth, status, or power, but on something far more fundamental: the recognition that each person has value, has a story, has the right to be treated with respect. A few months later, Mary received a letter. It was from a young woman who had been at the terminal that day, a college student who was struggling financially and feeling discouraged about life. The letter read, "Mary, I don't know if you remember me. I was at the terminal the day you gave us all that lesson. I was going through a very difficult time, questioning whether it was worth continuing my studies, whether I would ever be able to make a difference in the world. Seeing the way you handled everything with such dignity and wisdom, I understood that true greatness lies not in being rich or famous, but in being a person of integrity, in treating others with kindness, in never losing the capacity to love and forgive. Thank you for teaching me this. Thank you for showing me what kind of person I want to be." Mary kept this letter with her most precious photographs. She had spent decades caring for others, educating children, keeping houses in order, but she had never realized the real impact her life had had. Now, at 72, she finally understood that her existence had been significant not in spite of its simplicity, but because of it. The street where Mary lived also changed. Neighbors who previously only greeted with a distant nod began to stop and chat. They discovered that she had been an elementary school teacher before becoming a housekeeper, that she knew fascinating stories about the town, that she had wise advice for those willing to listen. She became a kind of informal matriarch of the neighborhood, someone people turned to when they needed a word of comfort or guidance. A year after that day at the terminal, Mary received a phone call. It was Diego, the employee who had been rude to her. He had gotten a promotion and was moving to another city. He wanted to say goodbye and thank her once more. "Mary, I wanted you to know that that day changed my life. I started to see people differently, to treat everyone with more respect. My girlfriend says I've become a better person.
My boss promoted me because he noticed I had changed my attitude with the clients. All because of you. Mary smiled on the other end of the line. Son, you changed because you wanted to change. I just gave you the opportunity to see who you really were inside. You were always a good person. You just needed to remember that. The conversation ended with Diego promising he would never forget the lesson learned that day. And Mary, hanging up the phone, thought about the extraordinary, transformative power of a simple gesture, a kind word, a moment of moral courage. Today, whenever someone asks Mary about the secret to a well-lived life, she responds with the wisdom of someone who has learned that true wealth lies not in the things we accumulate, but in the people we touch, the lives we transform, the moments of humanity we share. She often says that day at the terminal was one of the most important of her life, not because she was recognized or applauded, but because it was the day she understood that her life had had meaning, that her decades of silent work and loving care had made a difference in the world. And whenever she tells this story, Mary ends with a reflection that has become her life's motto. No matter how simple our existence, no matter how invisible we think we are, each of us has the power to transform the world around us. Sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to remind us of our own dignity, and a heart open enough to recognize the dignity of others. Mary Johnson's story and the day she changed the bus station has become legendary in her town. But more than a legend, it's become a constant reminder that humanity still exists, that kindness can still prevail, that every person, regardless of age, social standing, or circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And so, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in an ordinary bus station, a 72-year-old woman taught us that true heroes don't wear capes or seek recognition. They simply live their lives with integrity, treat others with kindness, and never lose the capacity to transform a moment of humiliation into a lesson in humanity. Mary's lesson continues to echo. In every act of kindness, in every word of encouragement, in every moment we choose to see the dignity in our fellow human beings, we are building a better world, one person at a time.